Hello, students. Welcome to a session on Merchant of Venice, written by William Shakespeare. We would be particularly looking into Act 4, Scene 1, as prescribed for you under Savouring the Classics. I'm sure you know the renowned playwright William Shakespeare, and you have recently dealt with the play Romeo and Juliet. Well, this particular play was written during the 16th century, and it was believed that it would have been written between 1596 and 1599. But this was republished in the first folio, which is a collection of his plays and works, in 1623. And as you all know, Shakespeare is considered to be the makers of modern English, especially because of his significant contribution to the modern English vocabulary. And this particular piece of work, or this play, Merchant of Venice, we can also see that there is quite a lot of phrases which has been contributed towards the modern English vocabulary. Now let's have a detailed look at the plot of this particular work. In short, you could say that this play, which was written in the 16th century, is about a merchant in Venice named Antonio, who defaults on a large loan provided by a Jewish money lender, Shylock. Let's have a detailed look at this. Now, there's a young Venetian whose name is Bassanio, who falls in love with Portia. Portia is the heiress of the royal family of Belmont. Now, Bassanio is a spendthrift. As soon as he has some money, he makes sure that he spends it, come what may. Now, since he is in love with Portia, he has decided to woo Portia, and for which he needs 3,000 ducats. Ducats is the amount. But as we've already mentioned, he's a spendthrift. At this point of time, he doesn't have that money with him. So he approaches his very close friend, a very good friend of his, Antonio, who is a merchant. Unfortunately, at that point of time, Antonio is in shortage of money because all his wealth was invested in the ships, and these ships are currently at the seas of Mexico and England. So Antonio tells Bassanio that we could find some money lenders who can lend him some money. And Antonio also promises that he would repay the amount as soon as the ships return from trade. And Antonio knows that he could definitely pay with interest as well, even if the money lenders would ask him to. He was very sure that his ships would come back very soon. So finally, they meet a Jewish moneylender named Shylock. And when Shylock gets to know that Bassanio is a friend of Antonio, as readers, we get to know that Shylock hates Antonio to the core. Basically, because of Antonio's anti-Semitic attitude towards Shylock. Now, what is this anti-Semitism? It's basically considered to be a form of racism, a prejudice or a discrimination against the Jews. And this is the reason as to why Shylock hates Antonio, and Antonio is a Christian. Shylock also has a certain amount of grudge against Antonio because he is also another person who would lend some money, but without taking any interest. Because Antonio believed that it is against the Christian principles. And that is the reason as to why Antonio doesn't take the interest. But Shylock, on the other hand, would take interest, a large amount of interest, in fact. So finally, Shylock agrees to make this short loan on one condition. Now, the condition is very simple, but quite interesting as well. that the loan must be repaid in 3 months. This is a simple part, that the loan has to be repaid in 3 months. Now, the interesting part is, if he doesn't do so, he will claim a pound of flesh from Antonio. Remember, Bassanio is the one who needs the money. Bassanio is Antonio's friend, and since Shylock does not like Antonio, he says that if they fail to repay the money in 3 months, that Shylock would claim a pound of flesh from Antonio. Look at the amount of hatred that he has towards Antonio. But Bassanio finds that there's something fishy about this condition, and he just refuses to take the loan. But Antonio was very sure that his ships would come back, and he also has to help Bassanio. They're very good friends. And without this 3,000 ducats, he cannot woo Bassanio cannot woo Portia. So, Antonio forces Bassanio, even after Bassanio's warning. They finally signed the contract. And Bassanio leaves for Belmont in order to marry Portia. Unfortunately, things turn quite topsy-turvy, and we get to know that Antonio's ships are lost in the sea. There is an accident out there, and he loses his ships. So, just imagine what would have Shylock thought at this point of time. He too hears the news. As soon as he hears the news, he brings Antonio for a trial before the Venetian court for justice. Back at Belmont, we see that Bassanio marries Portia, and at this point of time, he receives a letter from Venice. Now, we know what the content of the letter is. It's about Antonio's ships being lost, and as to how he wouldn't be able to repay the money, and Shylock has taken him for trial before the Venetian court for justice. Bassanio was dumbstruck. He just could not think of leaving Antonio in the hands of Shylock. So he makes sure that he goes there, or he goes to Venice at that very moment. Now, Portia also comes to know of the content of the letter, and she seeks help, in fact, a secret help, from her cousin Bellario, who's supposedly a renowned advocate. And she's a very wise lady. Please remember this. She's a very wise lady. And she keeps this as a secret as to how she's gone and met Bellario, who's an advocate. And she sends her servant, Balthazar, to Bellario. Now, this is what we see while we read. Now, Bassanio, as we've already mentioned, he arrives at the Venetian court with the money Antonio owes Shylock. So he does not come empty-handed, but he has the money to help his friend who helped him at his time of need. So he has the money, and he comes to the court in order to save Antonio. And he comes on the day of the trial. Now, this is a setting of Act 4. We have the court of justice, which is in Venice. And the Duke listens to the whole story, and he expresses pity for Antonio, because it wasn't Antonio's mistake that he has lost the ships. And even the Duke criticizes Shylock, because here Shylock is so determined to take the pound of flesh from Antonio. He doesn't want to hear anything else. There is absolutely no mercy, and the Duke calls him an inhuman wretch. The Duke summons Shylock, and as an introductory remark, he's trying to pacify Shylock. And here the Duke is also trying to play quite tactfully with Shylock, because he knows that it isn't very easy to handle Shylock. So he tells that Shylock, you're only pretending to be cruel. because at the end you will show mercy. The Duke out here is, trying to be a bit tactful out here. You're only trying to be cruel at the outset, but deep down you do have some human values. On the contrary, Shylock shows no mercy even at the end. How much ever Duke talks to him or expresses his pity for Antonio, Shylock turns a deaf ear to all of the Duke's appeals. And he says he cannot revoke the decision, for he has sworn. That is what he says. He's already taken the decision and he's sworn, and therefore he cannot revoke the decision. And Shylock also says, just like all the others, he has his own preferences. And it was very clearly written in the deed that if he doesn't pay in the time that was mentioned there, he would definitely claim a pound of flesh. And at this point of time, Bassanio intervenes because he's also there and he has the money with him, and he intervenes. And even when the money is brought to him, he says, no, I do not want the money now, because there was a time for it. And it was already said in the deed that the condition was this. And Bassanio calls Shylock as the most arrogant creature ever, and this is sheer arrogance and nothing else. Antonio, the poor man out there, he's also trying to intervene, and he said it's to argue with a Jew is the most impossible thing ever. There is no point arguing with the Jew, because he's already taken or he's made up his mind, and he would go to any extent to make sure that he gets what he wants or what he has decided. So there's no point arguing with him. This is what poor Antonio says. And then he also says that, Bassanio, whatever you talk, even the waves and the sea would be able to answer it, but not this Jew, not Shylock. And no one, and even if you give him more amount of money, or even if you try intervening with him, he would never ever change, or you would never ever be able to change this man, since he is a Jew. And we also see that Bassanio is actually trying to tempt Shylock by offering him twice the sum. See, he's taken only 3,000 ducats, so he promises to give him twice the sum that Antonio owes. But even then, even that excess money does not melt his heart, but he's very adamant about the fact that the condition is served rightfully. So the Duke at this point tells him that, there is no point talking to him, and he cannot expect, because if at all there is a time that when you are in need, he's talking to Shylock, when you are in need, you cannot expect any kind of mercy. Because if you show some mercy now, when there is a need, there might be a chance that you might also get some mercy. But at this point of time, you cannot expect any kind of mercy here on. Shylock criticizes the Duke, and he says that the Duke is treating him quite cruelly. Rather, he says, you have a lot of slaves around. Why is it that you are not letting them go? And why are you pouncing on me? And he says that the Duke can set the slaves free, or there is, if you really want to talk to me or talk me out of this plan, you would rather set your slaves free, or you could even get them married to your daughters. This is how Shylock criticizes the Duke. What a cruel and a rude man, right? And then finally he says, he would rather, I do not want excess money. I do not want any kind of a mercy or pity, nothing, but I would rather take the rightful claim to the pound of flesh, which was already set earlier on. Well, all the intervening, all the conversation goes in vain. The Duke turns silent and he is unable to actually pacify the Jew. So the Duke adjourns the court and he passes the case to Bellario. Now we already know that Bellario is a renowned advocate. Now, in between, we get to know that Nerissa, who is a servant of Portia, comes to the court with a letter. Now, the letter is that the letter from Padua, a letter from Bellario. So, since the Duke cannot bring out any decision, he says that this case be passed on to Bellario, who is a renowned advocate. Now, we read the letter as Bellario, the renowned advocate, has fallen sick, and therefore he is sending his friend, who is very brilliant, in order to take up this case. And he also mentions in this particular letter, let his age do not deceive you, because even those who have had many cases cannot reach up to his mark. He is that brilliant. So we have, so this is a letter which is being read out. And at this point of time, we can also see that Shylock is spotted sharpening his knife on the sole of his shoes. And the people out there, he says, he does not even have a soul. That is why he's actually sharpening his knife out there. And his place is definitely going to be in hell. And Gratiano, who is a servant of Bassanio, they're all friends. Rather, Bassanio's servant is Gratiano, and Antonio and Bassanio and Gratiano, they all know each other and they're all friends. And Gratiano sees this and calls him a disgusting dog. Now, according to the Pythagorean philosophy, it is said that animal souls are reincarnated into the human bodies. And Gratiano says that in Shylock's case, it is absolutely true, because he was rather a cruel wolf. And it is this animal soul, this cruel wolf, which has reincarnated into his body. Even these mentionings remains him, or Shylock, unmoved. So now the Duke announces the arrival of the young lawyer, which was mentioned in the letter. So the young lawyer is Balthazar. Now remember, students, please remember, Balthazar is none other than Portia, who is the wife of Bassanio. Portia disguises herself as Balthazar and comes there instead of Bellario. So this is how it goes. Okay? So I've already mentioned to you that Bellario writes a letter, and this is what it says, that Bellario is very ill, and therefore he sent a clever young Roman lawyer, and he's sending him on Bellario's behalf itself. And never underestimate him by his looks, because he's very clever and a genius man altogether. So remember, it is Portia who has disguised herself as this clever advocate named Balthazar. So Balthazar or Portia makes his appearance. The Duke summons both Antonio and Shylock, and Portia addresses Shylock and comments that the case is quite unusual because she's never heard of such a case at all. She says that, she's had many cases, but this case is quite unusual. Uh, though the Venetian law can't stop Shylock from proceeding, so this case has to be taken up quite seriously. So Portia asks Antonio if he actually acknowledges the contract that he has signed. Antonio says yes, he did sign a deed. He did accept the contract that he has signed. So just like the Duke, even Portia talks to Shylock, asking him to show some mercy to Antonio, because it is actually not Antonio's fault that he wasn't able to pay the money, but he has lost his ships and Bassanio has already brought in the money. Well, when she realizes that that Shylock was not willing to listen to her, Portia makes an eloquent speech on being merciful. And this is the crux of Portia's speech. She says that mercy happens, very easily, and it is not a mechanical process where somebody tells you and then you do it, but rather it just comes out of heart. Just like the gentle rain which comes from heaven. So this is what she says, that mercy should come out just like a gentle rain which comes from heaven. And rather, there is a divine quality in it, and you are losing that divine quality. So if there is a divine quality in you, mercy would come quite naturally. And she also says, when you have that divine quality and when you show that mercy, you are not only being blessed, but rather blessing occurs to both the giver and the receiver. So not only are you gaining, or not only is the one receiving gaining, but rather you're also gaining out of it. It is a divine quality. And then she also says, if the king's crown is the most powerful thing ever, the quality of mercy is even higher, is much more higher than the power of the crown of a king. You cannot compare it to any materialistic, stuff or a valuable stuff, but rather this is a divine quality where it is much more valuable than any of these materialistic stuff. And then she says, a merciful king is elevated to the station of God when he actually brings mercy with justice. Even a merciful king can actually be elevated if he brings about mercy with justice. This is the crux of Portia's speech. A very eloquent speech. In fact, this speech has moved many. But the character Shylock remains quite unmoved. Again, Portia asks Shylock if there is any scope for Antonio to pay off the debt rather than taking the pound of flesh, if there is any scope for Antonio. And as we've already mentioned, Bassanio is right there ready to offer twice the amount of money. And even if that doesn't suffice him, he said that he can even pay 10 times the money, but leave his friend. And Bassanio also says that, this Jew is really a malicious being. And Bassanio pleads the Duke, at any cost, could you at least amend the Venetian law and spare my friend? Because Bassanio is feeling terrible at this point, because it is because of Bassanio that Antonio has to go through the whole thing. But we know it's not actually because of Bassanio, but rather Shylock's hatred towards Antonio. Well, Portia intervenes out there, and she says it is not possible to amend any laws, because if you amend now, there would be many more crooked ones who would come and say, amend the law. And just because anyone comes and says, this might seem a reasonable case, but if we do so now, there'll be many more crooked ones who would come and say, the law has to be amended. And they will also plead for the same. Wow. Shylock was waiting to hear this, because all these while everyone was actually trying to persuade him to move away from what he has already signed. And he was not willing. He was totally unmoved. And Shylock was so happy out here, and he calls Portia, or Balthazar, who is disguised, or Portia disguised as Balthazar, as Daniel. Daniel is basically a biblical allusion out here. In the Bible, we can see that Daniel actually comes for judgment, who is also disguised, and Daniel at that rightful point of time shows wisdom, and he comes as judge in order to save Susanna. Okay, leaving that part of it. So Shylock is happy, and that is the reason as to why he calls her or Daniel. Well, it's quite ironical out here, because we see that in the Bible, Daniel is also disguised, and here Portia is also disguised as Balthazar. And she gives a last chance to accept the latest offer. Now, what was the latest offer? Bassanio did say that he would give 10 times of what he has taken from him. But at this point of time, we see that Shylock claims nothing but a pound of flesh from near Antonio's heart. What a cruel man, right? So this is the judgment. Now Portia goes through everything. She gives him a last chance. She's given a very eloquent speech on mercy, and this is the judgment that he makes. Shylock is free to claim his pound of flesh. Wow, Shylock was all happy out here. On one condition: it has to be precisely weighed, not more or less. Because അവിടെ ചോദിച്ചത് എത്രയായിരുന്നു? 1 pound of flesh ആണ് ചോദിച്ചത്. അപ്പോൾ 1 poundൽ കൂടാനും പറ്റില്ല, 1 poundൽ കുറയാനും പറ്റില്ല. Precisely weighed. And she also says that you need to produce a surgeon to bind the wound, because when you take a pound of flesh from him, he would definitely be bleeding, and you have to produce a surgeon. But Shylock denies this outrightly, because the producing of a surgeon isn't mentioned in the contract. Antonio, you can see, as we read the play, you can see that Antonio is actually bidding farewell to all his friends, because he knows that he's going to be killed. And you can see that Bassanio and Gratiano at this point of time, they say that they're even ready to give up their wives for Antonio. We would do anything for you, Antonio. And again, at this point of time, Shylock says, or Shylock criticizes, See, this is a Christian ideal of love. They are even ready to give up their partners. Now, why is he criticizing? Because there is also something that we need to know. Shylock has a daughter, Jessica. Jessica has fallen in love with Lorenzo. Lorenzo is a Christian. And when she went off with Lorenzo, she's also taken some amount of money from Shylock. So this is the reason as to why he hates Christians. Remember, in the beginning we said that? Not only does he hate Christian, but here again to Antonio, because Antonio is a man who never takes interest from people. But Shylock does. But his grudge against these Christians is basically because his own daughter, supposedly a Jew, has fallen in love with a Christian and she's run away with Lorenzo. And that is the reason as to why Shylock criticizes. See, Christians are ready to give up their partners even at any circumstances. He thinks of his own daughter. Coming back to the judgment. You can take a pound of flesh, not more or less, without dropping a single drop of blood. See, this is a judgment. You can take a pound of flesh, not more, not less, and without dropping a single drop of blood. Wow, what an interesting judgment. And then she also adds, according to the Venetian law, if blood is shed, the state can confiscate your land. Whose? Shylock's land. Wow, everybody out there in the court who's come to witness this case is shocked of the wise judgment. Nobody could ever dream of such kind of a judgment, because Antonio was already preparing for his death. Shylock, who just praised Portia as Daniel, is all the more confused. And now, at this point of time, Shylock expresses his consent on taking of the earlier offer. Remember, Portia had asked Shylock, ഈ അവസാന നിമിഷമെങ്കിലും നിന്റെ മനസ്സിന് മാറ്റമുണ്ടോ എന്ന് ചോദിച്ചിരുന്നു. ആ സമയത്തൊന്നും അദ്ദേഹം അത് സമ്മതിച്ചില്ല. But now he expresses his consent and he says, I can take that offer and he can let the merchant go. Because he knows that at no cost can he cut a pound of flesh at that exact with that exact pound and without dropping any blood. Bassanio rushes forward. As soon as he says that, Bassanio comes forward with the sum. Portia says, the Jew can have the penalty. Penalty is, you can take this is the judgment. You can take the pound of flesh without dropping a single drop of blood. And nothing else. You cannot take the money now because you were given time. But now that this is the judgment, you can either take this or nothing else. Wow. This puts Shylock in a dilemma. Gratiano, who's the friend or servant of Bassanio, hails Portia as a second Daniel who has come for judgment. See, basically, it's kind of poking Shylock, because Shylock did say that she is the Daniel, and Gratiano says, there's a spelling mistake here, Gratiano and Portia, that he is a second Daniel out here. Portia urges the Jew to take the pound of flesh. And then Shylock pleads at this point of time. He says, can I at least get that 3,000 ducats? If not the 10 times, if not the twice the money, but at least 3,000 ducats. Balthazar, or Portia disguised herself as Balthazar, doesn't allow it. These are all Portia. Sorry for the mistake out here. She doesn't allow it because she's already read the judgment. And then she also adds on, if a foreigner tries to kill a Venetian citizen, so Antonio is a Venetian citizen, the person he tried to kill can have a compensation of 1/2 of the foreigner's goods, and the remaining will be confiscated by the land. ഇപ്പം ഏതെങ്കിലും കാരണവശാൽ ഒരു ഫോറിനർ ഒരു വെനീഷ്യനെ കൊല്ലുകയാണെങ്കിൽ എന്താ സംഭവിക്കുന്നത്? ആ വെനീഷ്യനെ കൊന്നത് ഏത് ഫോറിനറാണോ അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ കൊന്നതിൻ്റെ കോമ്പൻസേഷനായിട്ട് 1/2 ഓഫ് ദ ഗുഡ്സ് ആ ആൾക്ക് പോവും. And the remaining will be confiscated by the land. And then she also adds, if Shylock expects mercy, only the Duke can help him. At this point, I cannot help you at all because I did give you chances. But it's only the Duke who would be able to help you if you expect any kind of mercy. Well, the Duke, who seems to be very generous, actually reduces the penalty to a fine. And we see that the Jew becomes very humble. He's guilty of what he has done because he knew that it was quite insane. It was not a pure judgment at all. And he asks the Duke to proceed with the penalty. And then Portia also asks, at this point of time, also asks Antonio, who is all ready to die, when he realizes that, his life is back, he's happy, and Portia asks him if he can render him any mercy. Antonio, who is also a generous man, agrees with the Duke. And he says there shall be a considerable reduction in the state's half. Whatever the state was planning to confiscate, there would be a reduction in that. But the other half that Shylock owes Antonio, remember about the foreigner killing a Venetian? So the other half that Shylock owes Antonio shall be given to Jessica. Remember I told you about Jessica's story, who eloped with Lorenzo the Christian, would be given to Jessica, Shylock's daughter. Jessica and to Lorenzo. This is what Antonio says. And finally, they also bring forth 2 conditions. One, Shylock must be a Christian. And before he leaves the court, he has to make a will and leave all his property to his son-in-law Lorenzo and to his daughter Jessica. And they can acquire this only after Shylock's death. But it has to be written. And right now, before he leaves the court, Shylock finally, who is guilty of what he has done, and in humility, he agrees, and thus the case is rendered. Duke asks Antonio to give Portia a reward for the help she's done. And remember, the whole case was for the 3,000 ducats, and Bassanio offers the 3,000 ducats to Portia. This wise lady out here, she declines. And then she asks Antonio for the gloves and Bassanio's ring as a souvenir of appreciation. Well, we know that Bassanio cannot give the ring because he recently got married to Portia. Well, Bassanio doesn't know that it's his wife who is standing right there. Nobody knows. And then Bassanio says, I'm sorry, you can ask me anything, but this, because this is my wedding gift. And he also says, I can get you the most expensive ring in Venice. Not this, because my wife did tell me not to lose this or sell this or give the ring to anyone else. I'm sorry, I cannot give this to you. And then she criticizes men in general, and she says that this is a typical excuse of men. You ask them something and then you would give them, that person would give an excuse. And then at the end of Act 4, Scene 1, Portia and Nerissa bids goodbye. And while they leave, you can see that Antonio is actually chiding Bassanio for not giving Portia a reward. Why don't you give that ring? Because she saved our lives. I can talk to Portia about it. And then finally, Antonio urges Bassanio to send the ring as a gift. This is how we end this particular act. But if you're interested, the rest of the story goes like this. Bassanio goes back to Belmont without any of the things that happened out there. I mean, Portia, who is disguised as Balthazar. And then she gets to know that Bassanio does not have the ring. And she says that you give rings as a gift. And it is only at that point of time that Bassanio gets to know that it was none other than Portia who would actually come to save their lives. So this is a whole plot, and what we've discussed so far is the detailed plot of Act 4, Scene 1. So something that we need to remember out here is the eloquent speech by Portia, a speech on mercy, about how Shylock is considered to be a cruel Jew. And here we also see that Shylock becomes the antagonist of this particular play. നമ്മൾ പറയുന്ന വില്ലൻ ക്യാരക്ടർ എന്ന് പറയുന്ന പോലെ Shylock becomes the antagonist of the play. And towards the end of this act, this particular Act 4, you can see that Shylock turns out to be a sympathetic character, a very sympathetic one. But that's only at a later point that we. But here we can see as to how the love that binds Antonio and Bassanio. Antonio is ready to help Bassanio even at the stake of his life. But it's quite unfortunate that he loses his ships. And it is at that point of time the whole plot changes and the setting comes all the way to the court of justice. This is the trial scene where Antonio is brought in for trial. And it is Portia, who is Bassanio's wife, who takes the right judgment, uses her clever nature, and saves her husband's friend. Thank you. I hope you've understood this particular act. You can find the rest of the materials in the classroom. Thank you.